Hey guys, how's it going? Sean back here with Everything REI, and today we're going to talk about statewide rent control here in California coming right up. AB 1482, the most popular phrase being spoken by all real estate investors and realtors here in the Bay Area in the past couple of weeks. What is it, and how will it affect housing prices in the very near future? AB 1482 stands for Assembly Bill 1482, which is the California Tenant Protection Act of 2019. And basically what it is it's a statewide rent control policy that all cities now must adhere to. See, back in the day, only cities like San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, and Mountain View had rent control, whereas cities like Milpitas, Sunnyvale, and Santa Clara did not. And so what that meant was that if you had a property in San Jose and you wanted to increase the rents, you were limited to how much you could increase the rents in San Jose, and you also had a harder time moving tenants out if you didn't want them. Whereas in Sunnyvale and Santa Clara, if you wanted to, you could just increase your rents to market rate just like that at the end of the lease. And with rent control, it's even hard to sell a property vacant. Like, the people who live in there are gonna stay there even as the owners switch. So I remember when I was first starting my real estate investing career, I was looking at properties that I could afford, which were triplexes and fourplexes over in Compton in LA. And I was thinking, okay, I could probably move into one of them and then rent out the other 3 units. And right now it says that rents are only $600 a month, but market rate is $1,300 a month. And I thought that was a great opportunity. I didn't realize that I would have to kick the tenants out to then raise the prices back to market and then bring someone in at $1,300 a month. If I just had my current tenant, I could only raise them a certain amount every single year. And I couldn't kick them out unless there was a just cause eviction. That's why it's actually more valuable to have some of your properties vacant in places like Oakland, San Francisco, and Santa Monica. Because you don't want a tenant inside. You want to be able to have it vacant, fix up the property, and then increase the market rate from, let's say, $1,700 to $2,500 a month. New owners in San Francisco and Oakland are actually paying out the current tenants, and they're doing something called cash for keys, where they're paying them between $50,000 up to $150,000 just to have a tenant move out so they can go in and do the work they need to do to increase the rents and make the property more valuable. So what does AB 1482 do for us? For all of the cities that currently don't have rent control, there's going to be this blanket rent control statement where all properties can only have their rents increased by 5% plus some inflation number that is to be determined later. So it would be based on some index. Let's say inflation is 3%, then you take your 5% base plus your 3% of inflation, and you can increase the rent by 8% a year. I believe this index of inflation can change every single year as well, but there's also a limiting cap of 10%. So you can have between 5% plus an inflation factor or 10%, whichever one is lower. So even though inflation one year could be 20%, you're still stuck at only increasing your rents by 10% a year. You also have to state a just cause eviction if you want to displace a tenant who's been there for over a year. And like I said, it doesn't preempt any local ordinances. So if there's already a rent control law in that city, like in San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland, then those actually take precedent. So let's say that you can increase rents by 5% plus some inflationary rate here, but let's say in San Francisco, I'm making this up by the way, you can only increase rents by 4%, then you still have to follow the more stricter guideline, which is San Francisco's 4%. The actual legislation won't take place until January of 2020, but it's going to be backrolled and is retroactive to March 15th of this year, 2019. So all the rent increases from March 19th of 2019 to January of 2020 are still subject to the same 5% plus an inflationary index cap, or 10%, whichever is lower. And it also says that rent increases shall not increment more than 2 times since March of this year. So luckily, at least when a tenant moves out, you're allowed to increase the rents back to market rate, and it's not subjected to that 5% plus inflation index cap. But there are some exemptions. So if a property is new, and that's defined as 15 years old or less, so properties that are built new after 2005, those don't have these rent control caps anymore. So there are some exceptions in place. For example, Berkeley currently has rent control in place, and it claims that if a property was built after 1995, it's considered new construction and therefore is not subjected to rent control laws. But because of this new bill, AB 1482, says that new construction is after 2005, now all those properties between 1995 and 2005 are now subjected to rent control. This bill pretty much encompasses all properties. And one exception is if it's owner occupied. So if it's an owner occupied single family residence and you rent out all the other rooms, sorry, roommates, those are not rent controlled. But if the single family house is owned by a corporation, REIT, or LLC then the house is subjected to rent control. If you also purchase a duplex and you live in one unit and rent out the other one, then that one is also not rent controlled as well. Housing that subsidized persons of very, very low income are also exempt from this rent control law as well. So it says here that landlords may only terminate a lease of residential real property for cause for a tenant who has been there for at least 12 months or 24 months if they are 2 or more people. But the just cause laws are a little bit more now, but it now includes, but is not limited to, non-payment of rent, criminal activity, refusal to sign a written extension or renewal of the lease, and unauthorized subletting. So if you have someone who is taking your property, living in it, and renting out to other people, and that's not part of your lease, then you can effectively kick them out. Interestingly, it says here that investors who want to convert a building to condominiums or make substantial renovation to units could evict tenants, but would have to pay relocation assistance equal to 1 month's rent. From what I understand, it was a lot harder to evict people in the past, and if an investor wanted to come in, buy a property, and renovate all the units, they had a very, very hard time getting people to move out. Like I mentioned earlier, they were paying them $150,000 for them to move out of their rent-controlled units. But here it says that you could evict tenants to do a substantial renovation to the unit, and you don't have to pay 1 month's rent. That actually sounds pretty good for an investor, and it's actually not that bad. Landlords can still evict tenants for several reasons: non-payment of rent, a breach of the material term of the lease, nuisance, waste, unlawful, or criminal activity, refusal to sign a written extension or renewal of the lease, assigning or subletting, refusing to allow the owner or manager to inspect the unit with appropriate notice. The owner can move into a unit and then effectively evict tenants for that. Landlords can evict tenants to renovate, and they can also evict them to go out of business altogether. So I wonder what that means. Does that mean that if I don't want to be in real estate anymore, I can sell my building and I can kick everybody out and have it vacant? Because that effectively increases the value of the property as well. Like I said, there are some weird things going on here where it seems that, yeah, it's bad that we're all forced to have rent control, but on the other hand, it doesn't seem as strict as it was in the past, where landlords were kind of locked in and couldn't do anything with their properties. So what does this mean for apartment property values? The value of apartment buildings in rent-controlled areas goes down significantly. People are less interested in purchasing properties there, where you can buy properties somewhere else with no rent control cap. But for the most part, you figure that you increase rents by about 3% a year anyways, and that's a lot lower than your 5% plus inflation number cap. I feel like the numbers only really get affected if you're going to do a huge upgrade to the property, like a huge value add component. Like if you're taking properties that are 50% below market rate, doing the work, expecting to get all that money back on year one, then it's probably not going to happen. But you're allowed to increase it slowly and slowly every single year. And I'm pretty sure after a certain while that the rent control cap will be less than your natural increase in rent anyways. So according to Marcus and Millichap's sheet over here, it looks like the average year-over-year rent change for Class A, B, and C is still around 5%. So it seems like if you add in the actual inflationary index to our rent control caps, we probably won't be seeing our rent growth limited by rent control. Basically, if you want to invest in apartment buildings in California, you just have to know what you're doing. Make sure you go in with the right strategy. Understand that you're now limited in some ways to the amount of rent you can increase, especially on year one. But if you're able to make the numbers work and you hold on to it for a long enough time, I'm sure that you guys are gonna be just fine investing, putting your money in, and having the rents increase slowly over time. I know rent control is a very touchy subject. There are definitely both sides to this argument. Like for example, for real estate investors, we wanna make sure that we have enough profit so that we're motivated to do the job that we need to do to renovate the properties, to bring them to its highest and best use. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that the tenants are able to have a place to live, an affordable place to live. It sucks hearing stories about people who got kicked out of their old apartments because they couldn't afford it anymore. And honestly, it's really rare to see rents go up by like $1,500 a month all of a sudden. And then again, the landlords are just bringing the value up to market value. And yeah, it's hard to say because I understand from the tenant's point of view too. Like when I was a renter, I would hate it if my rent went up by $500 a month. And this is what some people are facing nowadays. Personally, I don't believe that rent control is the best method of solving our housing crisis. Like the reason why rents are so high in the first place is because there are a lot of people here who do make a lot of money, who are willing to pay that high amount for these units in these areas. And I understand that we need to protect the people who can afford them, but I also find that it's unfair for landlords who put in their time, energy, and they're risking a lot of capital, and they're being forced to limit the amount of rent that they can charge based on some outlying factor. And it's not like the government compensates landlords when they lose money either. So is it fair that they cap them on their growth, on their potential? I'm not really sure how how that works. Again, super controversial subject. I'm not very political in nature, but these are my 2 cents. I believe that the true way to alleviate the housing crisis is to just allow people to build more and more. So if you look at other places where there's high population density, like most places in Asia, you see that they're building these giant condominium towers where you probably have about 100 different families living in one tower, and they're building vertically. Whereas here in the United States, we're building horizontally. You know, a lot of these places are single family homes on 6,000 square feet lots. It's probably not the best use of space. And I saw an article where Oregon actually banned single family zoning. So from now on, it's always going to be some kind of multifamily component to every single lot. And I think that's the direction we should take. There is a lot of room for people to live. And if we are able to make the development process easier for developers and allow them to build high quality, high density projects, we'll be able to have a lot of homes for a lot of different people and at very reasonable rates. Well, I hope this was helpful for you. This was a quick breakdown of AB1482 and statewide rent control. What are your thoughts? Do you think this is good for us? Is this bad for us? And leave a comment down below with what you think. All right, everyone. Hope you all learned a lot. Thanks. Have a great day.